Gospel of John, chapter 12, verses 1 through 8.
"6 days before Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. 'Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages.' He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. 'Leave her alone,' Jesus replied. 'It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always.'"
Today's reading is a familiar reading where we see where Jesus was anointed by a woman by pouring out expensive perfume and anointing him. And we read that when the disciples saw this, particularly Judas Iscariot, who eventually would be betraying Jesus, did not like it. He said that why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was a worth of a year's wages. We see that a woman spent a year's worth of her income to buy this expensive perfume and anointed Jesus. And the religious righteous did not like it. And he tried to explain his stand by making it so appealing that he is so mindful of the poor. But right there, the gospel writer John clearly says that he did not say because he cared about the poor. He did not fail to mention that. He very clearly said that Judas did not care about the poor because he cared about the money. He cared about the money because if she had sold that money and given to Jesus, it would have been put in the treasury of Jesus. Iscariot, Judas, was the keeper of the money. So he was looking at the money part of it, and he used to help himself with what was put into the treasury. A lot of times, when we think about poor people, especially in the modern world, a lot of people think that poor people are poor because of their own fault. A lot of times it is, most times it is not. So who are we to judge? When somebody is poor, we can blame, just like Judas Iscariot did, hey, it is because he is not working hard enough. Or he did not do what I did. But we don't know the whole story of that person, how that person was in that situation, what caused all of that, in the family background, the whole history of that person's life that he or she had gone through. A lot of times we become judgmental. That is what Jesus is teaching through this story about worship and service. Sometimes we think that worshiping Jesus at the cost of caring for the poor is not pleasing to God. You should not dismiss the poor thinking that you can please God or worship God, because Christianity does not support that. Caring for the poor and the people who are in need is part of worship. If you go to Jesus and anoint him with a precious oil, like the woman did. Maybe we don't have to do precious oils or perfume like that. We may give money to church. But that money that's giving to church is good. At the same time, if you are giving out of your special interest or personal interest, like Judas, it's not going to be pleasing to God. It has come from a compassionate care of the people who are in need. And that is what real worship is. So that is what this particular message that we are looking at, that Jesus is trying to teach us through this incident that we are discussing here today. Poverty is a reality, and there is no question about it. According to the United Nations definition, poverty is the inability of having choices and opportunities. It's a violation of human dignity. The World Bank shows that there are 1.2 billion people in this world who are going to bed hungry every night. 1.2 billion out of 8 billion. It's about 15 out of 100 people in this world that are going to bed hungry. But people like you and me here in this country probably don't know what hunger is. But I have seen it personally in India when I grew up. There are literally people do not have any food for their family and their children. And they don't know where the next food comes from. They don't know. They have to depend on other people. And thankfully, even with the system there are people who are very generous in helping. And I have seen it. I grew up with that system. There's a lot of poverty around us. But many people are also very generous with whatever they have. They share to the people who are in need. So when we are going and when we are living in a situation where affluence, at least we don't have to worry about the next meal. Even the poorest person in this country doesn't have to really worry about food. That the waste of food that we make every day can actually feed the whole hungry people in this world. You're talking about the wastage of food that happens in restaurants and grocery stores and many other places. The expired food dates, all of those are adding up to tons and tons of food that we are wasting in this country. It's not a waste, but it's because they are out of date and things like that. But if this could be somehow balanced out, that we could feed the other people who are going to bed hungry every day, that is what real service to God is. Jesus wanted to make that clear. Christ's gospel calls us to display the special concern to the poor, to recognize the excessive forms of moral and social disorder that are generating ever new forms of poverty. Particularly after the pandemic, poverty has increased about 40% around the world after the pandemic. It seems to be growing and not diminishing with all the wealth that we have been building. So what happens now is the increasing poverty has become a second preference in the eyes of the world leaders and the corporations, because they consider now poverty as a distraction to economic growth rather than an issue to be addressed. That is what the problem is. That's exactly what Jesus is showing through this message here, is that poverty is not a distraction. It is part of worship as Christians. When we worship God, and we cannot ignore the people who are in need. Our worship is not real worship if we ignore the people who are in need. So what do you do with the poor? Yes, we collect money, food, clothing, and other supplies to help the poor. Those are all good. But our willingness to help should come not out of our surplus, but out of our scarcity. Many times we think that we can only spare so much dollars because we don't have enough surplus left over. Because we have other needs. Anything that we can spare is after our needs. But that's not what Christ teaches us. When you are buying groceries for yourself, can you think of buying something for your neighbor who is in need? Even though you may not have the money, can you take some money out of your grocery and buy for somebody else? That is what real service of Christian service is. Not about from our surplus, but from our scarcity. That is what Christian teaching is. We should be willing to help even with our scarcity. The gospel of Jesus Christ teaches us that compassionate care is the most important part of our Christian faith. Many people, like I said, that they wanted to help others out of their need to help themselves, like Judas did. They are interested in what you can get out of it. A lady was answering her door in a community, and there was a man with a sad expression. He said, "I'm sorry to disturb you, ma'am. I'm collecting money for an unfortunate family in this neighborhood. The husband is out of work, the kids are hungry, the utilities have been cut off, and the worst, they're going to be kicked out of their apartment if they don't pay the rent by this afternoon." So the lady was very touched by that, and he said, "Yeah, I'm very happy to help." And they said, "But who are you?" He said, "I am the landlord." That's what Judas' attitude is. What is there for my interest to help somebody else? To take advantage of the compassionate care of somebody else in the name of service or in the name of God is wrong, because it is going to only fulfill your need and not the other person's need. Our devotion to Christ is reflected on how we share our blessings with others. That is what the reality is. Jesus said, we will show our fruits. The fruits of our life will show whose disciples we are. And then Jesus said to them, the poor you will always have with you. A lot of times people misinterpret this so that they can make it a passive statement. Oh, it's always there going to be poor people, so just leave it alone. That's not what Jesus said. Jesus said there is going to be poor people always with you. In other words, suggesting that the perfume could have been sold to the poor, sold to help the poor, is not the point. It is also that whatever you have, you need to share with the poor people. For example, acknowledging poverty as a reality and not being judgmental. In the Old Testament, Israelites were given the law through Moses. And in Deuteronomy, we read that there will not be any poor among you when you occupy the promised land. There will not be any poor among you. That's what God told through Moses to the people of Israel when they took over the promised land. But there was still poverty there. Why? That is exactly what Jesus was quoting, that if you didn't follow the words of God, that God gave them, because God gave them in that command that you will always open your hands to the poor. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed toward your fellow Israelites. That's we read in Deuteronomy 15:11. But they took only part of it and took the other part out. To be open-handed, to share your blessings with others. Remember I told you about one time about the Jubilee year in the Mosaic law. It was a very interesting financial concept, where every 50th year there's a balancing, if you remember that. 7th day is the Sabbath day, right? 7 days. The 7th day they celebrate as Sabbath. 7th year is a Sabbath year. They celebrate the whole year as Sabbath year. And 7 Sabbath years make 49 years, right? And the 50th year is called a Jubilee year, if you remember the message that I preached one time. And the Jubilee year is very interesting because Jesus said in Luke chapter 4, when he started this ministry, he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor, freedom for prisoners, and recovery for the blind, and to proclaim the year of Jubilee." Jesus said that in the beginning of his ministry. He was referring to the Jubilee year. Every 50 years, the system was designed to wipe off everybody's debts. The law was given to Israel through Moses, dictated or told them that nobody would get poor, that they will not have enough to eat. So in other words, they were told that the property belonged to God. Nobody owns it forever. You can only have a property or anything for 50 years. After that, everything gets balanced out. The system of Jubilee year. When someone borrows money, the borrower would temporarily become bound to the creditor. Any income earned would go as a payment for the reduction of debt. In the course of time, due to many circumstances, borrowers cannot pay all of that back. They continue to be debtors to others. That becomes they were bound to be serving other people. In order to stabilize the economic condition and to prevent any family from becoming permanently landless and poor for extended time, Moses established the Jubilee year, that every 50th year they will celebrate with all the leased and mortgaged lands were be returned to the original owners, and all mortgages and loans were written off. You start from a clean slate every year. It is good news for the poor people. That's what Jesus was saying that I came here to declare the Jubilee year, the deliverance of the poor. That is what God told them to practice. But they did not follow that exactly. That is why they have still poor people among them. That's what Jesus is saying. So this is a powerful lesson for his disciples for every age. We should not become indifferent, but it calls us to, instead of a mutual sharing in life. These people, the poor people, are not outsiders. We have to consider them as our insiders. The poor people are our brothers and our sisters. We should not judge them or marginalize them, because Jesus came for those people more than he came for the rich and the famous. And poverty around us is an opportunity to share Christ. And this is a good time every year that Americans share their blessings. This is summons to lose sight of the opportunity. We should not lose sight of the opportunity to do good. Open our hands and freely give whatever we have to bless others. One of the Christian saints who used to say this thing, that John Chrysostom, he's a Saint Chrysostom, said this: those who are generous should not ask for an account of the poor's conduct. Do not ask anything of them, but if you are a Christ follower, you will help them even if they are the most wicked people in the earth. It's a very tough thing to handle. That's what the Saint Chrysostom was telling his disciples. If you are a disciple of Christ, you do not judge them based on their actions, but you judge them based on Christ's compassion. So do not ask them questions. Rather, give them what you have, whatever you can. The rich and the poor, the prosperity and poverty, those things are reality in this world. Jesus said the people in Smyrna church in Revelations, he talked about a poor church in Smyrna in Revelation. He said, you are poor worldly, but you are rich in your faith and in your actions. That is what we are called to do. Not to be rich in material things, but to be rich in our faith, in our care, in our compassion to others. Jesus said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Poor in spirit means we are rich in love. When we lose sight of the poor in spirit, to humble ourselves before God, our total dependence on God, and think that our success is just our own efforts. That is not what poor in spirit is. Poor in spirit is always acknowledging God's blessing in us. It is not because of who I am, only because of God is what I am. And also Jesus met the poor where they were. He did not wait for them to come to him. A lot of times we wait for the poor people to come to church. The church has to go to the poor people. We cannot wait for the poor people to knock on our door. They are not a distraction to our worship, but they are the purpose of our worship. So let us remember to be caring and compassionate during this time, especially the holidays. Let us be caring and compassionate, not because of our affluence, not because of we have leftover money. Even if we don't have leftover money, be considerate when we meet our needs. Be thinking about the other people. During the 3rd century AD, there was a dreadful plague swept through the city of Alexandria in Egypt. Dionysius the Great lived during that time, and he written a record of what happened during that plague in Egypt. He said only Christians were seen helping other people. Christians showed unbounded love and loyalty, never sparing themselves and thinking only of one another. Heedless of danger, they took charge of the sick, attending to their every need and ministering to them in Christ. It was the Christians who showed astonishing love. But the people who didn't believe in God, the heathens and others, they behaved the opposite way. They tried to get rid of the sick. They tried to run away from the people because they were afraid that they will also catch that plague. Sounds like pandemic, right? Corona. They were running away from the sick ones, their dear ones, leaving them abandoned. And the Christians, the churches and the priests took care of them, even at the risk of their lives. That is what Christians do. That's what Christians have done in history. Let us continue to do that work that God has given us to do, because worship comes and becomes complete only by caring and helping others. Both are equally important. Sacrifice for God's kingdom is sacrificing for your brothers and sisters. May the good Lord bless us with these words as we go from this place, to be a blessing to others, to be caring and compassionate, to be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ.